The sound wasn't a thud. It was a sharp, sickening crack that somehow echoed louder than the roar of the Boeing 777's twin engines. In seat 2A, the champagne glass shattered. In the aisle, a flight attendant gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. But in seat 1, Ania Washington didn't scream. She simply turned her head, blood trickling down her cheek, and looked at the man towering over her, with eyes that didn't show fear, only a terrifying, icy calculation. Sterling Cross thought he had just put a subordinate in her place. He had no idea he had just signed his own death warrant. The air inside the first-class cabin of Flight 902 from New York to London smelled of expensive leather pressurized oxygen and the distinct crisp scent of old money. It was a space designed to separate the elite from the ordinary, a sanctuary where the world's problems were kept behind a heavy velvet curtain. Sterling Cross adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit, his eyes scanning the cabin with a mixture of boredom and critical disdain. At 52, Sterling was a man who wore his entitlement like a second skin. As the CEO of Crossline Logistics, a shipping empire inherited from his father and ruthlessly expanded, he was accustomed to the world bending to his whims. If the coffee was cold, a barista was fired. If traffic was bad, a helicopter was chartered. He was a man who believed that net worth directly correlated to human worth. "Excuse me," Sterling snapped, not bothering to look up at the flight attendant hovering nearby. "This champagne is lukewarm. I specifically requested the 2008 vintage, chilled to 42 degrees. This tastes like bath water." "I apologize, Mr. Cross," the flight attendant, whose name tag read Sarah, said, with a practiced, tight smile. "We are still at the gate. The chilling units are just powering up, fully. I can bring you some ice." "Ice dilutes the notes," Sterling sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "Just fix it. I don't pay $12,000 for a seat to drink swill." Sarah nodded and retreated to the galley, exchanging a weary look with her colleague. Sterling sighed, leaning back into the wide plush seat of 2A. He pulled out his phone, checking his stocks, feeling the familiar rush of superiority as he watched his portfolio climb. It was then that he noticed the passenger in 1A. Seat 1A was the crown jewel of the cabin, the most secluded, the most spacious, the one usually reserved for diplomats or A-list celebrities. Sterling had tried to book it himself, but his assistant had told him it was blocked. "Unavailable for request," she had said. Sitting there now was a young black woman. She couldn't have been more than 26. She wore a simple, oversized beige hoodie, black leggings, and worn-out sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was currently absorbed in a thick paperback book with a cracked spine, wearing large, noise-cancelling headphones around her neck. Sterling frowned. He looked at his own suit, then at her hoodie. He looked at his Rolex, then at her bare wrists. Something in Sterling's worldview fractured. It was an error in the code. In Sterling's mind, first class was a club, and looking the part was the membership fee. This girl looked like she belonged in row 48, squeezed between the bathroom and a crying baby, not sipping sparkling water in the seat he had been denied. He leaned across the aisle, his voice dripping with faux politeness that barely masked the aggression underneath. "Excuse me, miss." Nia Washington didn't look up. She turned a page, her eyes scanning the text. Sterling's jaw tightened. Being ignored was a sin he tolerated less than bad service. "Hey, hello." He snapped his fingers, the sound sharp in the quiet cabin. Nia slowly lowered her book. She turned to face him, her expression neutral, her dark eyes calm. "Can I help you?" Her voice was soft, melodic, but carried a weight that didn't match her casual attire. "I think you might be in the wrong seat," Sterling said, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. This is first class. The economy cabin is back through the galley, past the curtain. Nia blinked once slowly. I am aware of where I am sitting, sir. Thank you for your concern. She lifted her book again. Sterling felt the heat rise in his neck. It wasn't just that she was in the seat. It was that she didn't seem grateful or nervous to be there. She acted as if she owned it. Look, Sterling said, his voice rising, drawing the attention of a passenger in too effin' older man named Arthur Caldwell. I know how these upgrades work. The airline overbooks, they bump up an employee or a lucky lottery winner. But seat 1A is reserved for specific clientele. I requested that seat weeks ago. Then you should have booked it earlier, Nia said, not looking up from the page. Sterling laughed, a harsh barking sound. I don't think you understand who is speaking to you. I am a Platinum Key member with this airline. I practically own this route. Congratulations, Nia murmured. Maybe the airline will give you a pin. The air in the cabin shifted. Sarah, the flight attendant, rushed back from the galley, sensing the spike in tension. Is everything all right here, Mr. Cross? No, it isn't. Sterling pointed a manicured finger at Nia. I want to know why this child is in the premier seat while I'm stuck in row 2. It's bad optics, Sarah. It degrades the brand. Nia finally closed her book. She placed it gently on the tray table. The title was obscured, but the text was dense, academic. Sir, Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. Ms. Washington is a confirmed passenger in 1A. Please, we are preparing for taxi. I need you to lower your voice. Washington, Sterling scoffed, looking Nia up and down. What, like the city? Or is that just a common name where you're from? It was a blatant, ugly provocation. Arthur Caldwell in 2F shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Easy now, friend. Let's just settle in for the flight. Mind your business, Sterling snapped at Arthur before turning back to Nia. I'll make you a deal, sweetheart. Since you clearly just got lucky with a computer glitch, how about I give you $500 and you swap seats with my assistant in Economy Plus? That's a lot of money for... well, it's a lot of money. Nia looked at him. For a second, a flicker of amusement crossed her face, gone as quickly as it appeared. I don't need your money, Mr. Cross, and I prefer the window. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm reading. She put her headphones on, effectively dismissing him like a servant. Sterling Cross sat back, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. His hands clenched into fists on the armrests. He wasn't just annoyed anymore. He was insulted. In his world, when he spoke, people jumped. When he wanted something, he took it. To be dismissed by a girl in a hoodie, a girl who looked like her, was an indignity he couldn't process. The plane began to push back from the gate, the engines whining to life. But for Sterling, the turbulence had already begun. He stared at the back of Nia's head, his mind all spiraling into a dark, toxic place. He ordered a double scotch the moment the seatbelt sign flickered, his eyes never leaving seat 1A. He wasn't going to let this go. 30 minutes into the flight, the cabin lights were dimmed to a soothing amber hue. The hum of the aircraft usually lulled passengers to sleep, but the atmosphere in the front cabin was brittle, charged with static electricity. Sterling was on his 3rd scotch. The alcohol hadn't sedated him. It had only lubricated his rage, stripping away the thin veneer of corporate civility he usually maintained. He watched Noor. She was eating the meal service poached lobster and truffle risotto with a grace that irritated him. She didn't look impressed by the food. She ate it as if it were merely fuel. Sterling unbuckled his seatbelt. The fasten seatbelt sign was off, but the captain had warned of light chop ahead. He stood up, swaying slightly, and walked toward the lavatory. On his way back, he stopped right next to seat 1A. He loomed over her, blocking the light from the entertainment screen. Nia paused a fork halfway to her mouth. She didn't look up immediately. She took a breath, composed herself, and then slowly raised her eyes. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "The problem?" Sterling slurred slightly, leaning down so his face was uncomfortably close to hers. "Is that you're pretending. You're sitting there eating that food, acting like you're one of us. But you're not." "One of us?" Nia asked, her voice dropping an octave, becoming steelier. "And who is us, Mr. Cross insecure men who measured their value by the seat number on a boarding pass?" "Don't get smart with me," Sterling spat. "I know a diversity hire when I see one. Who paid for this ticket? A boyfriend, some affirmative action program, or maybe you're just a high-end escort flying out to meet a client." The cabin went deadly silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. Arthur Caldwell stood up in row 2. "Hey, that is enough. Sit down, man. Sit down." Sarah, the flight attendant, was rushing down the aisle now, her face pale. "Mr. Cross, return to your seat immediately, or I will have to inform the captain." Sterling ignored them. His entire world had narrowed down to the woman looking up at him with utter indifference. He wanted fear. He wanted submission. He wanted her to apologize for existing in his space. "You think you're better than me?" Sterling hissed. "You think you can just ignore me?" "I think," Nia said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension like a scalpel, "that you are a sad, small man who is drunk and making a mistake that will cost him everything. Go sit down before you do something you can't undo." It was the calmness that broke him. It was the authority in her voice, an authority that didn't belong to a girl in a hoodie. Sterling's hand lashed out. He grabbed the glass of red wine from Nia's tray table and threw it. The dark liquid splashed across her face, soaking into her beige hoodie, staining the leather seat crimson. Gasps erupted throughout the cabin. Sarah screamed, "Sir!" Nia didn't flinch. She closed her eyes as the wine dripped from her chin. She took a napkin and slowly wiped her eyes. When she opened them, the indifference was gone. In its place was a fire so intense it should have burned Sterling to ash right there. "That," Nia whispered, "was the last warning." "Warning." Sterling laughed, manic and wild. "What are you going to do? Call the police. I buy police departments." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh, trying to yank her out of the seat. "Get up," I said, "get out of my sight. You don't belong here." Nia didn't struggle. She didn't pull away. She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his face. "Remove your hand." "Or what? Or I remove it for you." Sterling sneered and pulled harder, twisting her arm. That was when the snap happened. Not a bone, but the tether of restraint Nia had been holding on to. She moved with a blur of speed that was impossible for a layperson to track. With her free hand, she grabbed Sterling's wrist, twisting it back against the joint. Sterling howled in pain, his grip loosening. But he didn't retreat. Fueled by adrenaline and humiliation, Sterling balled his other hand into a fist. He didn't think. He didn't consider the consequences. He just swung. His fist connected with the side of Nia's face. Crack. The sound was terrible. It was the sound of knuckles hitting cheekbone. Nia's head snapped to the side. Her lip split instantly, blood spraying onto the white antimacassar of the seat. She slumped back against the window, dazed. For 3 seconds, the entire plane was frozen in a tableau of horror. Sarah was frozen with her hand on the interphone. Arthur Caldwell was standing with his mouth open. Sterling stood there, breathing heavy, his knuckles bruised, a look of shocked triumph on his face. He had done it. He had physically broken the barrier. Now, Sterling panted, straightening his jacket. Maybe now you'll listen." He turned to walk back to his seat, assuming the interaction was over. Assuming he had won. He didn't see Nia Washington sit up. He didn't see her wipe the blood from her lip with the back of her hand. He didn't see the way her eyes changed from those of a passenger to those of a predator. Nia unbuckled her seatbelt. The click was soft, but in the silence, it sounded like the cocking of a gun. "Sarah," Nia said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the galley. It was devoid of pain, devoid of emotion. It was purely operational. "Lock the cockpit door. Do not open it for anyone." Sterling stopped and turned around. "What are you babbling about?" Nia stood up. She wasn't tall, but suddenly she seemed to fill the aisle. Blood was staining her teeth, making her smile look terrifying. "You wanted to know who I am, Mr. Cross," Nia said, stepping into the aisle. She rolled her neck, a sickening pop echoing in the quiet. "Let me show you." Sterling Cross had been in fights before. Bar brawls in his 20s, heated boardrooms, shoves, the kind of scuffles where heavy men threw heavy weight around until someone broke a nose. He knew how to hurt people. He was 6'2", 220 pounds of aggressive mass. Nia Washington was 5'7". She weighed perhaps 130 pounds. On paper, physics was on Sterling's side. But violence is not just physics. It is geometry, and it is psychology. As Sterling lunged a clumsy haymaker swing aimed at her temple, Nia didn't back away. Most people retreat from aggression. Trained operators step into it. She stepped inside his guard, her movement fluid like water flowing around a rock. Her left forearm deflected his wrist, guiding the heavy punch harmlessly over her shoulder. In the same motion, she drove the palm of her right hand upward. It wasn't a slap. It was a percussive strike to the chin, snapping Sterling's head back so violently that his teeth clicked together with the sound of a pistol shot. He staggered, blinded by the sudden shock, his equilibrium gone. "You bit," he gurgled, trying to regain his footing. He never finished the word. Nia spun, dropping her center of gravity. Her leg swept out, hooking behind Sterling's knee. It was a textbook takedown, executed with the precision of a dancer. Sterling Cross, the CEO of Crossline Logistics. The man who made grown men tremble in meetings hit the floor of the first-class cabin with a bone-rattling thud. The impact knocked the wind out of him, leaving him gasping like a fish on a deck. Before he could inhale, Nia was on him. She didn't punch him again. Punching breaks knuckles. Instead, she grabbed his right wrist, the one that had held the wine glass, and twisted it behind his back, applying pressure to the rotator cuff. Sterling screamed a high-pitched, jagged sound that ripped through the cabin's stunned silence. "Stay down," Nia said. Her voice wasn't raised. She wasn't panting. She spoke with the eerie calm of a surgeon cutting into a chest cavity. "Get off me." Sterling thrashed his legs, kicking out, knocking a serving cart over. Silverware clattered everywhere. "Do you know who I am? I will bury you." "You already asked that," Nia said, tightening the torque on his arm. "The answer hasn't changed." "You are a threat to the safety of this aircraft." Sterling managed to get a knee under him, fueled by pure, unadulterated rage. He bucked, throwing Nia off balance for a split second. He scrambled up his face, purple eyes bulging. He grabbed a steak knife from the fallen cart. "I'm going to kill you," he roared, lunging again. The passengers screamed. Sarah, the flight attendant, cowered behind the galley partition. Arthur Caldwell, the older man in 2F, fumbled to unbuckle his seatbelt to help, but he was too slow. Nia didn't need help. She saw the knife. She didn't panic. She watched Sterling's shoulder telegraph the thrust. As the blade came down, she caught his wrist with both hands, twisting his arm outward, while simultaneously driving her knee into his solar plexus. The air left Sterling's body instantly. The knife clattered to the floor. Nia didn't stop there. She maintained her grip on his arm and pivoted, using his own momentum to slam him, face first, into the bulkhead wall of the galley. Thud! Blood blossomed from Sterling's nose, smearing against the pristine white plastic of the wall. He slid down, dazed the fight, draining out of him as quickly as the oxygen had. Nia reached into the pocket of her hoodie. She pulled out a pair of thick yellow plastic flex cuffs. "Hands behind your back," she ordered. Sterling groaned, trying to push himself up. Nia didn't ask twice. She jammed her knee into the small of his back, grabbed his wrists, and zipped the cuffs tight, the plastic bit into his skin. She hauled him up by the collar of his ruined Italian suit and shoved him into the jump seat, usually reserved for crew during takeoff. She used a second pair of cuffs to secure his ankles to the seat frame. Sterling Cross was neutralized. Nia stepped back, her chest finally heaving slightly. She touched her lip. It was still bleeding profusely. She looked at her hand, coated in red, then looked at the cabin. Every single person was staring at her. The silence was absolute. It was a frozen moment in time, the kind of stillness that only happens after extreme violence. "Sarah," Nia said, turning to the trembling flight attendant. "I need the first aid kit, and I need you to get the captain on the interphone. Tell him we have a level 2 security threat that has been contained." Sarah blinked her eyes wide. Who are you?" Nia reached into her back pocket. She pulled out a slim black leather wallet. She flipped it open. A silver badge caught the cabin light, along with a laminated ID card with a holographic seal. "My name is Special Agent Nia Washington," she said, her voice echoing in the silent cabin. "Department of Defense Internal Investigations Division. And this flight is now a federal crime scene. The atmosphere on Flight 902 changed from a luxury experience to a detention center in the span of 5 minutes. Captain Robert Miller had emerged from the cockpit, his face grim. After a brief, hushed conversation with Nia, he had addressed the cabin, apologizing for the disturbance and instructing everyone to remain seated. The co-pilot was flying the plane. Miller was now acting as jailer. Sterling Cross sat in the crew jump seat, his nose swelling to the size of a plum blood drying on his expensive shirt. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a common drunk, but the arrogance hadn't fully left him. It had just curdled into a vicious, simmering resentment. Nia sat in the galley perched on a metal container while Sarah cleaned the cut on her lip with antiseptic wipes. "I'm so sorry, Agent Washington," Sarah whispered, her hands shaking. "I should have stopped him earlier. I should have—" "You did your job, Sarah," Nia said, wincing as the alcohol stung the open wound. "Men like him rely on people being too polite to stop them. It's not your fault." "Is it broken?" Sarah asked, looking at the swelling on Nia's cheekbone. "Hairline fracture, maybe," Nia said, probing the bone with her tongue. "I've had worse." From the jump seat, Sterling spat a glob of blood onto the floor. "Internal investigations," he rasped his voice, thick due to his broken nose. "You're a spook, that explains the cheap clothes. Government salary." Nia thanked Sarah and stood up. She walked over to Sterling, towering over him, now that he was strapped down. "You still don't get it, do you, Sterling?" Nia said softly. "Get what?" Sterling sneered. "That you assaulted a civilian. That you assaulted a VIP passenger. When we land in London, my lawyers will be waiting at the gate. You might have a badge, sweetheart, but I have the kind of money that buys senators. You'll be working security at a mall in Idaho by next week." Nia stared at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen a few times and turned it around so he could see. It wasn't a police report. It wasn't a news article, it was a PDF document. The header read, "Classified. Operation Ironclad." Sterling squinted. His eyes scanned the document. Then the color drained from his face, leaving him a pasty, sickly white. "You recognize that file name, don't you?" Nia asked. Sterling swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about." Sterling Cross, CEO of Crossline Logistics. Nia recited from memory, her eyes boring into his. "Over the last 18 months, your company has been flagged for shipping irregularities, specifically unmanifested cargo containers moving from Southeast Asia to the port of Newark. Containers that bypass standard customs checks because you paid off the dock foreman, a man named Gary Vance." Sterling's breathing hitched. That's hearsay." "We found the containers, Sterling." Nia continued her voice, dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "We found the modified engine parts. And inside the parts, we found the high-grade guidance chips prohibited for export. You've been selling restricted military tech to black market buyers in the Balkans." Sterling shook his head frantically. No, I'm just the CEO. I don't manage every crate. That's a rogue employee. You can't pin that on me." "We have the emails," Nia said. "We have the wire transfers from your personal offshore account in the Caymans to the buyer. We have it all." She leaned in closer. "I wasn't on this flight to arrest you, Sterling. That was the funny part. I'm actually on my way to a NATO summit in Brussels to present the evidence on the buyer. You were just a small fish in a big pond. The FBI was going to pick you up at your office on Monday morning. I was just taking a nap before a long week." Sterling looked at her, his eyes wide with horror. The realization was crashing down on him. "You," he stammered. "You weren't tailing me." "No." Nia said, a dry, humorless smile touching her swollen lip. "I bought a ticket. I used my miles to upgrade because I wanted to sleep. You were safe for another 48 hours. If you had just sat in seat 2A, drank your scotch and shut your mouth, you would have had one last weekend of freedom." She gestured to his handcuffed wrists. "But you couldn't do it. You couldn't handle a black woman sitting in a seat you wanted. You had to prove you were the big man. And in doing so, you assaulted a federal agent during an active investigation." Nia stood up straight, looking down at him with pity. "Assaulting a federal officer is a felony with a mandatory minimum sentence. But doing it on an international flight, that's federal jurisdiction under the Patriot Act, provisions for air safety. You just handed me the power to bypass the extradition treaties and hold you immediately upon landing." Sterling slumped in his restraints. The fight was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollow shell of a man who realized he had destroyed his own life because of his ego. "You played yourself, Sterling," Nia whispered. "Please." Sterling whimpered, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "Please, Agent Washington, we can work something out. I can give you names. I can give you the buyers." "I already have the names," Nia said coldly. She turned her back on him. "And I don't make deals with men who hit women." She walked back to seat 1A. The champagne glass was shattered. The seat was stained with wine and blood. But as she sat down, the other passengers looked at her not with judgment, but with awe. Arthur Caldwell raised his glass of water in a silent toast. Nia nodded to him. She picked up her book. The Art of War wiped a speck of blood off the cover and put her headphones back on. But the drama wasn't over. As the plane began its descent toward Heathrow, the frozen flight was about to thaw into a media firestorm that Sterling Cross never saw coming. The remaining 4 hours of Flight 902 were a study in suffocating tension. The first-class cabin, usually a place of rest and indulgence, had become a cage. Sterling Cross remained shackled to the jump seat. The adrenaline had faded, leaving him with the throbbing agony of a broken nose and the terrifying clarity of sobriety. He watched the passengers. He expected them to be asleep, or reading, or ignoring him. But they weren't. The cabin was eerily silent, but it wasn't inactive. Every single passenger had their phone out. The soft blue light of screens illuminated their faces in the darkened cabin. They were scrolling. They were tapping. And occasionally they would look up at Sterling, then back down at their screens, whispering to one another. "What are they doing?" Sterling hissed at Sarah as she walked past with a water bottle. "Why are they staring at me?" Sarah didn't look him in the eye. "The in-flight Wi-Fi, Mr. Cross. It's very fast on this model." So, Naya's voice drifted from seat 1A. She hadn't turned around, but she was holding her own phone up. "You're trending, Sterling. Trending. #1 on Twitter, #1 on TikTok, and I believe you just hit the front page of Reddit." Sterling strained against his cuffs. "What are you talking about?" In seat 3C. A teenager named Leo, who had been silent the entire flight, stood up. He walked over to the jump seat, holding his iPad out so Sterling could see. On the screen was a video. It was shaky, clearly filmed from the angle of seat 2, F. Arthur Caldwell's seat. It captured everything. The insults about the affirmative action hire, the wine throw, the racial slurs, the moment Sterling punched Naya in the face, and then the swift, brutal takedown where Naya dismantled him. The caption under the video read, "CEO of Crossline Logistics assaults black woman in first class. Gets instant karma from undercover vet. #Crossline, #justice, #FAFO." Sterling stared at the view count. It wasn't in the thousands. It was in the millions. The counter was spinning so fast, it was a blur. 5 million views in 2 hours, Leo said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "My followers are digging up everything, man. They found your high school yearbook. They found your divorce records. They're even tracking your private jet usage." Sterling felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him dizzy. "Take it down," he croaked. "You don't have permission to film me. This is a violation of privacy." "There is no expectation of privacy in a public setting when you are committing a felony assault," Nia said, swiveling her chair around to face him. She held an ice pack to her cheek, which was now turning a deep shade of purple. "And the internet doesn't have a delete button, Sterling. It's out. The world has seen who you really are." Sterling looked around the cabin. The wealthy elite, the people he considered his peers, were looking at him with disgust, not because he was a criminal, but because he was a public relations radioactive disaster. He saw Arthur Caldwell typing furiously on his BlackBerry. "Arthur," Sterling pleaded. "Arthur, you know me. We played golf at the vineyard. Tell them this is out of context." Arthur didn't stop typing. "I'm shorting your stock, Sterling," he said coldly. "I'm advising my firm to dump all Crossline holdings before the market opens in New York. You're toxic. If I were you, I'd worry less about the video and more about the board meeting that's undoubtedly happening right now without you." The realization hit Sterling harder than Naya's fist had. The flight wasn't just transporting him to a jail cell. It was transporting him to a world where his name, the name his father had built for 50 years, was synonymous with bigotry and violence. He wasn't just going to prison. He was going to be poor. "I need to call my lawyer," Sterling screamed, struggling against the plastic cuffs. "Give me a phone, I have rights." "You have the right to remain silent," Nia said, closing her eyes. "I suggest you use it. We start our descent in 20 minutes. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of misery for Sterling. He watched his empire crumble in real time through the whispers of the passengers. He heard snippets of news reports playing on their screens. Crossline Logistics stock down 14% in after-hours trading. Board of Directors calls emergency meeting to oust CEO Sterling Cross. Senator Harrison Fletcher releases statement condemning the attack. By the time the landing gear deployed with a heavy thud, Sterling Cross was weeping. Not out of remorse, but out of the sheer, crushing weight of his own ego collapsing on top of him. The descent into London Heathrow was usually the time when Sterling Cross felt most powerful. He loved watching the city sprawl out beneath him, a grid of lights that he viewed as a game board he knew how to play. But today, as Flight 902 banked sharply over the Thames, the view from the window offered no comfort. The cabin remained in a state of suspended animation. No one was packing their bags. No one was putting on coats. The passengers were glued to their seats, their eyes darting between the humiliated billionaire shackled in the jump seat and the young woman in seat 1A, who was calmly packing her charger into a worn backpack. When the wheels finally kissed the tarmac with a screech of rubber, the sound felt like a gavel banging in a courtroom. The reverse thrusters roared, slowing the massive beast, and as the plane taxied toward Terminal 5, the captain's voice crackled over the PA system. The tone was grave, stripped of the usual "Welcome to London" cheer. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. We have been instructed by ground control to hold at the gate. Local authorities will be boarding the aircraft immediately. Do not stand up until you are instructed to do so. Sterling shifted in his seat, the plastic flex cuffs biting into his wrists. This is ridiculous, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Sarah, get me a water. My throat is parched. Sarah, the flight attendant who had served him for 7 hours, looked at him from the galley. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She simply turned her back and began latching a cabinet. The silence was deafening. The plane shuddered to a halt. The seatbelt sign didn't ding off. It stayed ominously illuminated. Moments later, the heavy thud of the jet bridge connecting to the fuselage echoed through the cabin. Then the hiss of the airlock opening. Cold, damp London air rushed in, but it was quickly displaced by the presence of authority. 4 officers from the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Protection Command stormed onto the plane. They were imposing, dressed in tactical vests and high-visibility jackets. Behind them walked 2 men in sharp, dark suits, American agents from the Diplomatic Security Service, DSS, their earpieces coiling down into their collars like snakes. "Stay seated," one of the British officers commanded, his voice booming. The lead officer scanned the cabin, his eyes locking instantly on the jump seat. He marched toward Sterling, his boots heavy on the carpet. Sterling Cross. Finally. Sterling barked, trying to summon the ghost of his former authority. "Officer, I want to file a formal complaint. I have been unlawfully restrained by a passenger. I demand that woman—" He jerked his head toward Naya. "Be arrested for assault and false imprisonment." The officer didn't blink. He reached down, grabbed Sterling by the lapels of his ruined Italian suit, and hauled him to his feet. "Sterling Cross, you are under arrest under the Aviation Security Act, 1982, for endangering the safety of an aircraft." The officer recited his accent, clipped and professional. "Furthermore, we are executing a provisional arrest warrant issued by the United States Department of Justice for conspiracy to violate the Arms Export Control Act and wire fraud." Sterling's legs gave out. The officer held him up effortlessly. "Arms export." Sterling stammered, his face draining of color. That's a mistake. I want my lawyer. Call Preston Davis. He has offices in the city. He'll clear this up in 5 minutes." One of the American DSS agents stepped forward. He held a tablet in his hand. He tapped the screen and turned it to face Sterling. "Mr. Davis issued a press release 12 minutes ago, Mr. Cross. the agent said dryly. "He has formally recused himself from your counsel. He cited irreconcilable ethical conflicts following the release of the video. You have no counsel of record in the UK." "The video," Sterling whispered. "The video," Nia Washington said. She stood up from seat 1A. She looked weary, the bruise on her cheek blooming into a dark purple flower, but her posture was military straight. She picked up her bag and walked towards them. "Agent Washington." The DSS agent nodded respectfully. "We have the transport team ready. Are you injured?" "Minor trauma," Nia said, touching her face lightly. "I'm clear to debrief. Let's get this trash off the plane." The British officers cut the plastic ties on Sterling's wrists, only to immediately slam his hands behind his back and ratchet on a pair of heavy cold steel handcuffs. They didn't use the polite double lock setting. They squeezed them tight. "Move!" The officer shoved Sterling toward the door. As they marched him down the aisle, the silence of the cabin finally broke. "Good riddance," someone shouted from row 4. "Rot in hell, you racist," another voice cried out from Economy Plus. Sterling kept his head down, the shame burning his skin. But the true nightmare hadn't even started. They exited the aircraft and walked up the jet bridge. Sterling expected to be taken out a side door, whisked away to a private holding cell. "Why are we going to the main terminal?" Sterling panicked as they approached the glass doors leading to the concourse. "There's a back way. I'm a VIP. Not anymore," the officer said grimly. "And the back exit is blocked by construction. Welcome to the show, Mr. Cross." The doors slid open. The flashbulbs hit them like a physical wave. It was blinding. A wall of white light exploded from hundreds of cameras. The arrival hall of Terminal 5 was packed, not just with travelers, but with a massive press pool. Every major news network was there. BBC, N, Sky News, Al Jazeera. The viral video had done more than just trend. It had become a global event. The world wanted to see the man who thought he was above the law. The roar was deafening. Mr. Cross over here. Why did you hit her, Sterling? Is it true your company was smuggling missiles? Look at the camera, you coward." Sterling tried to shield his face with his shoulder, but the officers held his arms firmly, forcing him to walk tall. There was nowhere to hide. His swollen nose, his blood-stained shirt, his terrified eyes, it was all being beamed live to satellites orbiting the Earth. He looked up at the massive digital display hanging above the duty-free shop. Usually it showed ads for perfume or whiskey. Today it was tuned to a 24-hour news channel. The headline ran across the bottom in urgent red letters. "Crossline Logistics shares plummet 60%. Board members resign en masse. FBI raids New York headquarters." Sterling let out a sob. It wasn't just a scandal. It was an annihilation. Everything his father had built, everything he had ruthlessly protected, was gone. Vaporized in the time it took to fly across the Atlantic. The police shoved him toward a waiting armored van just outside the glass doors, the crowd jeering and booing as he passed. But the cameras didn't cut away once the van doors slammed shut. They panned back to the gate exit. Nia Washington walked out. She wasn't in handcuffs. She wasn't hiding. She walked flanked by the DSS agents. But she didn't look like a protected asset. She looked like a conqueror. The crowd's mood shifted instantly. The booing stopped. A hush fell over the terminal, followed by a ripple of applause that started slowly and grew into a roar. A reporter from the BBC, a woman with sharp eyes and a microphone held like a weapon, managed to duck under the police tape. "Agent Washington," she shouted over the din. "The internet is calling you a hero. They're saying you took down a giant. Do you have a statement? How does it feel to be the woman who broke Sterling Cross?" Naya stopped. The DSS agents moved to block the reporter, but Naya held up a hand. She waited for the noise to die down. She looked directly into the camera lens, her dark eyes intense and unblinking. "I didn't break him," Naya said, her voice steady, amplified by the array of microphones thrust toward her. Men like Sterling Cross are already broken. They are hollow structures held up by money and the silence of others. All I did was stop being silent. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, wincing slightly, as the movement pulled at her bruised face. "Dignity isn't something you buy with a first-class ticket," she continued, addressing the millions watching at home. "And power isn't about who you can step on. It's about who you can protect. To everyone watching, never let someone make you feel small, just because they're sitting in a bigger seat." She nodded once to the cameras, a dismissal as effective as any royal wave, and turned to the agents. "Get me a coffee," she said, her voice dropping back to a professional tone. "And then get me to the interrogation room. I want to be there when the reality sets in." As she walked away, the crowd parted for her, leaving a clear path through the chaos. Behind her, the news tickers were already changing their headlines, but Naya didn't look back. The game was over. Now it was time to clean up the board. The interrogation room at New Scotland Yard was cold-painted in a sterile, headache-inducing shade of grey. It was a far cry from the plush leather of Seat 2A. Sterling Cross sat at a metal table. The handcuffs were still on. His nose had been set by a police medic, taped up with white gauze that stood out starkly against his bruised purple face. He looked small. The bravado that had fueled him at 30,000 feet had evaporated, leaving behind a shivering, terrified man who knew the walls were closing in. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Naya Washington walked in. She had changed out of the wine-stained hoodie. She now wore a sharp charcoal grey blazer over a black turtleneck. She looked every inch the federal agent she was. She carried 2 coffees in paper cups. She set one in front of Sterling and took the seat opposite him. "Black coffee," she said. "I figured you could use the caffeine. It's going to be a long night." Sterling stared at the cup, then up at her. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Why?" he rasped. "Why are you here to gloat? I don't gloat, Sterling. It's unprofessional," Naya said, taking a sip of her own drink. "I'm here to finalize the transfer of custody. The UK authorities are charging you with assault and endangering an aircraft. But the US Attorney General has requested your immediate extradition to face the smuggling charges. You're going to be on a plane back to New York tonight. Economy class this time. Marshals will be escorting you." Sterling let out a bitter, jagged laugh. "You think you're so smart? You got lucky? I lost my temper. That's all it was." Naya set her cup down. She leaned forward, clasping her hands on the table. The air in the room shifted, becoming heavy with unspoken truth. "Sterling, look at me." He looked. "Do you play chess?" she asked. Sterling frowned. "What?" "Yes, I was captain of the chess team at Yale. What does that have to do with anything?" "Then you know what a gambit is," Naya said softly. "It's a move where you sacrifice a piece, usually a pawn, to gain a positional advantage, to lure the opponent into a trap." She opened a folder she had brought in with her. She slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a psychological profile. At the top was Sterling's photo. "We've been tracking your smuggling ring for 2 years, Sterling. We knew about the guidance chips. We knew about the money laundering. But we had a problem. You were careful. You insulated yourself. Every time we got close to an indictment, you'd throw a subordinate under the bus and lawyer up. We knew if we arrested you in New York, you'd post bail in an hour, shred the evidence, and flee to a non-extradition country before the trial started." Sterling's hands began to tremble. We needed to hold you, Naya continued, her voice relentless. We needed a crime that would deny you bail, a violent crime, a crime committed in front of witnesses that would make you radioactive to your lawyers and your allies. She tapped the paper. We built a profile on you, Sterling. We knew you were a narcissist. We knew you had a history of verbal abuse toward service staff. We knew you were obsessed with status. And we knew you had a deep-seated irrational hatred for anyone you deemed beneath you invading your space. Sterling's mouth fell open. The realization started to creep in, cold and horrifying. "The seat," he whispered. "Seat 1A. "We blocked it," Nia said calmly. "We knew you requested it. We had the airline block it so you couldn't have it. We knew that would irritate you. We knew seeing me in it, a young black woman in a hoodie, looking unbothered, would push you over the edge. I wasn't reading that book by accident, Sterling. I was waiting." Sterling looked at her as if she were the devil. You let me hit you. I calculated the risk," Naya said, touching her bruised cheek. "I knew you wouldn't use a weapon immediately. I knew you'd start with words, then escalate to a shove or a slap. I needed you to strike the first blow. I needed the assault on record. The moment your fist connected with my face, you sealed your fate. You didn't just assault a passenger, you assaulted a federal agent. No bail, no flight risk. You're in a cage until the trial ends." Sterling slumped back in his chair. He looked physically ill. The randomness of the event, the bad luck he thought he had, it was all a lie. He hadn't been unlucky. He had been targeted. He had been played like a fiddle. "You sacrificed yourself," Sterling muttered. "I sacrificed a pawn," Naya corrected him, standing up. "To take the king." She walked to the door and knocked twice for the guard. As the door opened, she paused and looked back at him, one last time. "Enjoy the flight home, Mr. Cross. I hear the middle seats in the back row don't recline." The trial of Sterling Cross was the most watched legal event of the year. The video of the airplane assault was played on a loop on every major news network. The image of the billionaire CEO spitting racial slurs and throwing a punch became the defining image of his legacy. The defense tried to argue provocation. They tried to argue temporary insanity due to alcohol, but the jury and the public weren't buying it. The evidence of the arms smuggling was overwhelming, bolstered by the seized hard drives from Crossline Logistics, which authorities raided while Sterling was sitting in a London jail cell. 6 months after Flight 902, Sterling Cross stood before Judge Evelyn Carter in the Southern District of New York. He had lost everything. His wife had divorced him, taking half his remaining assets. Crossline Logistics had been seized by the government, rebranded, and sold off for parts. His friends, the country club members, the politicians he had bribed, they had all ghosted him. "Sterling Cross," Judge Carter said, looking down from the bench with stern disapproval, "for the charges of assault on a federal officer, conspiracy to violate the Arms, Export Control Act, and international money laundering, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel banged. It was the final sound in Sterling's life as a free man. As the marshals led him away, in an orange jumpsuit, chains rattling around his waist, Sterling looked into the gallery. Sitting in the back row, dressed in a simple beige suit, was Naya Washington. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't cheering. She was simply watching her face, unreadable. She held a book in her lap, The Count of Monte Cristo. She met his eyes for a brief second, nodded once, and then stood up and walked out of the courtroom into the bright sunlight of a Manhattan afternoon. The world had moved on. The internet had found a new villain. But for Nia Washington, the file was closed. The king had fallen, and somewhere on another flight in another city, there was another mission waiting. but this time she'd probably book a window seat. And that is the story of how one man's ego became his ultimate downfall. Stirling Cross thought his money made him untouchable, but he learned the hard way that true power isn't about how loud you can scream, it's about how well you can play the game. He saw a victim in seat 1A, but he was staring into the eyes of a grandmaster who had already planned his checkmate 10 moves ago. What do you think did Stirling deserve the 25 years? Or was the trap set by Nia too ruthless? I want to hear your opinion in the comments below. Let's get a debate going. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude justice and karma, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I post new dramas every week. Thanks for watching. And remember, always be kind, because you never know who you're really sitting next to.